Hi guys, I'm here today to chat about the 3 and a bit women's prize books I've picked up so far. So I audiobooked 2 of these and read 2 of them in physical form. So the 2 that I audiobooked are Cersei by Madeline Miller and My Sister the Serial Killer by Oyinkan Braithwaite. And I read in physical form, fully, Bottled Goods by Sophie van Llewyn, and I started but DNF'd Lost Children Archive by Valeria Luiselli. So the first thing I want to say is, if I'd been asked prior to reading these books, you know, what order would you think you'd rate these books, I would have thought that my least favourite would have been My Sister the Serial Killer. Then I'd have probably said Bottled Goods, then Cersei, then Lost Children Archive. So let's talk about Lost Children Archive first. So I got about 100 pages into this, which I think is just under a third. Yeah, I really didn't enjoy it. I started doing this as a buddy read with Chris from Chris's Bookish Cauldron, and I know Chris has since finished it, but I don't think he enjoyed it. I'm really intrigued to see his review when he puts it up. We had really similar thoughts on this as we were reading it. So if you don't know, this is set in the modern day, and it follows, the story opens with a sort of wife and mother narrating the story as her and her partner and their 2 children decide to leave New York and travel across the US to, they're both, God, I should know the word, you're told it so many bloody times in the novel. They both work on documentaries, but on the audio side. So they record sound and they study sound. And they're both travelling across the US, and they sort of want to go to different places, but they have the same ultimate destination, which is, I should know, Arizona, and the area of the Apache. And so they're heading there and sort of diverting along the way, and the book's described as dealing with the child refugee crisis, and I thought that was going to be a really big part of the book. What I read, it wasn't. So I basically feel like I read 100 pages of the author trying to wrap up 3 things she has an interest in and pretend it was a novel. So this is, in my mind, an incredibly pretentious book. It was lacking any depth, any believability of characters, any real structure, and yeah, it just felt like a bag of bones really. So in order to create a good novel, particularly if you're not focused on plot, which I'm absolutely fine with, what you need is a great frame to build that novel around. And in this sort of novel, where that frame isn't plot, it has to be character. And it doesn't matter for me if I hate those characters, that's absolutely fine. But I have to believe in them and understand their motivations. And I felt neither of those things happened with this novel. What I felt is that Valeria Luiselli had created this character who, by the sounds of it, had the exact same interests as she did, and same political viewpoints, and made this character have sort of a rocky marriage. You don't really understand why. You're told they're having issues, you're told they have arguments, you're never given any insight into what those issues or arguments are, ever. You don't really know anything about her husband and all these problems she has with him. And mainly, she just lists loads of stuff about books, philosophers, artists that she likes. She just does a lot of name dropping. It all feels incredibly elitist. That sounds bad. You're very aware that this author likes a certain type of art, and quite a, I guess, a middle class type of art, and that's what you're getting. Like, that's the only viewpoint in this book. But throughout the book, she'll reference these books over and over and over again, and then every now and again you get told about, you get given a list of all the things they're carrying with them, and which are always books, and you're like, why are you giving me this list? You've already told me about them in the last chapter. I don't need to hear this again. So yeah, didn't like all that. Hardly anything about the child refugee crisis is mentioned in the 100 pages that I read. I really expected that to be the driving force of the novel. Didn't feel like it was. Didn't care for any of the characters, didn't feel connected. They all felt like caricatures. And also every now and again, Chris and I were discussing this, she'd try and write something really sort of mushy and like emotional and over the top, and it was so jarring in comparison to this really sort of removed style of writing. It just was bad. Basically, I got to a certain point in this novel where, I mean, there was a scene, this was pretty much, I gave up a little bit after this. There's a scene where they're driving along in the car and they're listening to a musical piece on the car stereo, and the father is dictating to the children what he thinks this musical piece means in great detail. And then after listening, you're told by the mother that she actually thinks it means something entirely different. She then tells you that. And then she decides to tell you about when she watched this musical piece with ballet, and she describes for about a page and a half the moves the ballet dancer makes and how it makes her feel. And it's awful. Like, and the thing is, I'm probably just the wrong reader. Loads of people probably love this book, but to me that was just pretentious and elitist. Like, no one wants to read about what a ballet dancer does. You want to see it, and unless you can see it, there's no point in someone telling me so and so lifted their leg up here. Like, I can't picture it. Also, I don't know why you're telling me this, unless you're just making me aware that you really love ballet and you love listening to musical pieces in the car with your 5-year-old. Like, oh my god, I couldn't bear it any longer, so gave up. This isn't a spoiler, but from what I know, the narrative viewpoint shifts and is told from the young boy's perspective. So I decided to flick ahead and see if I would rather hear his voice. He was insufferable, and so I decided at that point, can't bear this anymore, and I DNF'd it, and I have zero regrets. This just isn't for me. Obviously loads of people love it, but I'm not one of those people, so bad times. Okay, this one's a little bit more positive. So, Bottled Goods. This one I have really mixed feelings about, and I'm still not quite sure where I stand. Ultimately, I didn't like really enjoy this book. So I read the first half about a week ago and I was like, oh, actually I like this more than I thought. I'm speeding through it. It's quite quirky, it's a little bit funny, like fun times. Then for about a week, didn't feel inspired to pick it up, wasn't bothered by it, and just kept thinking, oh, I need to read those 90 pages of that book and like get it finished, check it off the list. So then yesterday I picked it up and was like, let's read the rest of this book. Really didn't enjoy the second half as much. So this follows a woman who is in a sort of unhappy marriage. She lives in Romania, and her and her husband want to defect and leave. And because of that, they're being investigated. Very early on in the novel, you are told that her grandfather had a spell cast on him and he was shrunken to a tiny, tiny size and kept living in a birdcage for many years of his life. And things like that happen throughout the novel, just weird magical things that seem at odds with this really serious topic. And I didn't really enjoy this one. I feel that novels of this nature that do these things in sort of like a quirky, offbeat, satirical way just don't land right with me. And I think this one is nothing to do with this being a bad book. I genuinely just think I'm the wrong reader. Loads of people enjoy this sort of thing. They'll see loads of layers that I don't see. They'll have all the context and they'll understand the folklore of countries like Romania and all these sort of magical elements behind this story. I just feel at a complete remove from the characters and these awful things are happening to these people, and to me the way it's written sounds really like offhand and it's unpleasant. And also I'm just really frustrated with the main character. Like, I don't want to give anything away, but I just feel like for a long time I'm just like, why aren't you doing anything? Like, really annoying. And yeah, and then I also felt and I won't spoil anything, but I felt like the last 4 chapters, just the pace compared to the rest of the novel was ridiculous. Like, the decision to have the novel at a certain pace and then to just switch that up in the last 20 pages didn't work for me. So good bits, bad bits, you know, to start with I sort of enjoyed it, but yeah, this ultimately just wasn't a book for me. Okay, a little bit more positive. So I listened to Circe by Madeline Miller on audiobook, and I will say it's a phenomenal audiobook. The narrator is called Perdita Weeks. I'm definitely going to listen to more of her audiobook narrations, she's phenomenal. And I truly believe that if I had read this book in physical form, I may have taken a really, really long time to read it, or perhaps even DNF'd it. And the reason for that is, whilst this is a myth retelling, I feel like in a way, and I haven't read the Iliad or the Odyssey, so I can't comment, but I've read a lot of original sort of fairy tales and folklore and things like that, and I know that the originals of those stories are very surface level. The characters aren't really what matters. What matters is the story, the weird magical creatures, the darkness, all those sorts of things. And the characters are like little puppet pieces that move the story along. So I thought that this would be a myth retelling. People were saying, you know, in the original, Cersei hardly gets any storyline. She's just this witch on an island and you don't really know, and this book is giving her a voice. And so I sort of expected this to be much less mythy, and what I mean by that is, I guess I expected to feel closer to Cersei. I expected it to feel less like a myth retelling. And it didn't for me. So it felt very episodic, like the original would have done. I don't want to give... I didn't know anything about Cersei's story beforehand, so I'll try not to spoil too much, but there's part of her story that takes place on an island, and lots of people who are very well known in the original myth come to the island and something happens. And there's a big period in this book where it feels like that's the story. Someone comes to the island, something happens with Cersei, they leave. Next chapter, somebody else comes, adventure happens, they leave. And Cersei never changes, so I guess that's my biggest complaint about this novel. I found Cersei infuriating. I wanted to shake her. I wanted to say, you've lived for hundreds, perhaps thousands of years. How are you so bloody naive? Like, I don't think you would be after that long. It was so infuriating, particularly towards the end. I also just felt like, I just didn't feel connected to Cersei. So yeah, I feel like any sense of enjoyment or connection I had to this book was entirely down to the audiobook narrator. She was amazing. And the book itself isn't bad, it just ultimately didn't care about Cersei or any of these people. I found her annoying, and yeah, so I know loads of people really love this, and I don't think it's badly written. I don't think there's anything sort of bad about it. I think I just really like books that aren't plot driven and the characters are really well developed, and this is the reverse of that. It's really plot driven with really poorly developed characters. So yeah, I would rather a myth retelling that, whilst using the original framework, allows itself to get much closer to the characters, and perhaps that would have needed a shorter time period. Perhaps that would have needed to not take up so much of Cersei's life and to instead focus on a much smaller time period. But yeah, I would have preferred that. So yeah, shocker of all shockers, my favourite of the four was My Sister the Serial Killer by Oyinkan Braithwaite. So I also listened to this one on audio, and it's a really short audiobook. It's only around 4 hours, so I listened to it in 2 days. And again, I have to sort of preface this with saying the audiobook narrator was phenomenal, and a big reason, a big part of the reason I really enjoyed this novel, you know, was aided by her amazing narration. So the narrator for this one was Valeria up here, and I'm definitely going to see what other books she's narrated. So this book, you probably heard, is about two sisters who live in Lagos, and one of them is a nurse, and the book opens with her telling you that her sister is a serial killer, and her sister has just called her to the scene of the third murder she's committed, and each times that she's killed a man, she said, I was defending myself because he was attacking me. And this is the first point that our narrator, Corriday, has really started to question and think to herself, is she really defending herself? Because this seems a bit suspicious, particularly seeing as he's been stabbed in the back. Like, he obviously wasn't coming at her. And you sort of follow Corriday on this journey. So whilst it's this really dark storyline, and you think to yourself, if I was in this situation, what the hell will I do? Because I think it's really, ultimately, it's impossible to know what you do in these situations. But it is easy to, I found it easy to empathise with Corriday, and I know so many people have said that there's no one to like in this story, but I don't know, I sort of did like her because I really felt for her, and there's a lot of backstory with the sisters as to sort of how they became this way emotionally, and it really made sense to me as to how they'd both cope with their childhoods in certain ways, taken on these roles, and how they'd become the people they were today. I've only just finished it today. It could be that in a month I don't remember much about it, but for now I enjoyed it way more than I thought I would. I'd really recommend it. I particularly recommend the audio because, as I said, she's just an amazing narrator, and I heard a lot of people be like, you know, I just felt like it was going to go deeper, and it really didn't. I really felt like it did. I think this had a lot of commentary on male and female dynamics, like what men want out of beautiful women, like what it's like to be a beautiful woman who is sort of lusted after and highly regarded by people of any gender before they even know you. I would definitely read anything this author brings out in future, so I was really impressed. So yeah, I'd love to know your thoughts on these 4 books. So I'm glad I ended that on like a happy note because I feel like I was pretty negative. But yeah, so in general, I guess I feel a little bit more worried about the long list than I originally did, because I thought that I would enjoy some of these books a lot more than I did. And so I'm going into the other books with a bit more trepidation. I'm fully willing to DNF anything I'm not enjoying. So please let me know your thoughts on these books down below. I'd love to have a chat about them. I think these 4 are particularly good examples of like different types of readers, because ultimately the Valeria Luiselli one, I have quite a lot of bad things to say about it, but I don't think I could say that any of the 4 are completely bad books. I think they're for very different types of readers, and yeah, so sometimes I'll say I really didn't enjoy this book and I do just think it wasn't very good. Don't think I'd say that about any of these. I think there's just different types of people who'll enjoy them. So I'd love to know your thoughts down below. And yeah, I'm really interested to hear how you guys are getting on with the long list and your experience with reading all the books. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.